Yeah, I have to say at the outset, this is one of the most complicated, if not the most complicated hostage case I've seen in 25 to 30 years. The job for the negotiators is very difficult at this point in time. We'd heard from the outset of the case over 3 weeks ago that almost immediately Qatar was involved. Qatar has a very long and successful track record in acting as a third party intermediary in hostage cases around the world. They were making progress. We saw two sets of releases, initially two American women, and then just a few days later, two elderly Israeli women. So we were seeing progress. At this point in time, with Israel going into Gaza, as your reporter said just a few moments ago, the sort of the space for negotiation is closing down. It won't be closed entirely, and Qatar, Turkey, I believe, Egypt, plus the Americans and Europeans and others who have those held hostage there will be trying every single last avenue they can think of to try and get as many hostages out as possible.
What makes these negotiations so complex?
So this is, as I said, it's pretty much the most complicated case I've ever seen. Firstly, it's a mass hostage taking. That's not totally unheard of, but it is highly unusual. It's very difficult to hold that number of people without being caught, without being found for a prolonged period of time. The hostages have been taken into the middle of quite literally a war zone. Hostage taking usually happens in the grey zones between calm and chaos, where you've just got enough calm to be able to hold people, but just enough chaos not to be found. The animosity between the two principal negotiating sides, Israel and Hamas, is obviously very high, not just because of the nature of the attacks that Hamas mounted, but because of a decades-long conflict that is ongoing. Add on to that the regional dynamics, Iran, Hezbollah, and so on and so forth, and plus the interest of Western governments, principally the US, which is an incredibly important partner in the region. There's so many. This is not just a hostage case. This is a hostage case, a diplomatic crisis, and a war ongoing at the same time. So it's, as I say, I don't remember a case this complicated in 30 years.
And what do we know about what both sides are saying they want out of the negotiations?
Well, I think things are changing day by day, almost hour by hour. I mean, I don't have any sort of privileged access to what is being said within those negotiations, but clearly Hamas's position has changed as a result of Israel going in. Their sort of scope for negotiation is narrowing. They are quite literally on the defensive now. I imagine that the kind of things we've been hearing throughout will still be on the table. Humanitarian relief for the Palestinians, release of those Palestinians who are held in Israel, wider Hamas gains. The question really is how much ground Israel is willing to concede. It's been through what it is describing as its own 9/11. I mean, it's from a distance, it's quite difficult to understand just how impacted Israel and Israelis' psyche is over what's happened. So very, very, very difficult and tense negotiations, I should imagine.
Meanwhile, Israeli leaders have met with families of the hostages, and they're telling them that the more military pressure, the more firepower, the more Israel strikes Hamas, the greater the chances of getting a solution that will allow the return of loved ones. What do you make of this approach?
Well, I mean, it's the hostages to start with are in a perilous situation, whether Israel goes in or not. I imagine that the Israeli government is making a calculation about the position it finds itself in now, and what is it that is going to create the conditions that brings Hamas closer to the table. The thing that worries me in this situation, this isn't unique to this, but it's very much heightened in this situation, given what's happening on the ground, is that agitated and anxious hostage takers are often highly unpredictable. And so I worry that the closer that Israel goes in, the closer that Israel gets physically to Hamas and those hostages, you have hostage takers who are running on adrenaline anyway, who are then more likely to react in unpredictable ways. So I very much hope that the Israelis are proceeding with an element of caution at this point in time.
And what's the likelihood of some sort of ceasefire being part of the negotiations?
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to say. I mean, certainly there are so many different parties calling for that. I'm not quite sure the extent to which there's an appetite for that from the Israeli side. I mean, as I said, the attacks that were inflicted on them on the 7th of October were extraordinary. They were barbaric. They were completely inexcusable. So, on the Israeli side, they are tired of this. They want to bring an end to Hamas. And it's, tensions are high on all sides. So I'm not entirely sure there's the appetite from their side, but at the same time, we have got growing pressure on them from, United Nations, the US, the UK, and so on and so forth. And, right from the outset, Western allies were there in lockstep with Israel, trying to calm the situation as much as possible, amongst other things. So I hope at some point that something will happen that will allow aid to get into the Palestinians, because as your reporter said just a few minutes ago, the situation for ordinary Palestinians living in Gaza is absolutely critical right now.
And as you say, time is really important here, or a limiting factor. Realistically, what do you think can be achieved in negotiations at the moment?
Yeah, so I would say it's really, really important that even as perilous and difficult as this situation is, that we don't give up hope. I've worked on and around hundreds of hostage cases over the last 30 years, and the number of times that you think it's just impossible for that individual or that group of individuals to get themselves out of that particular situation because of how difficult it is, because of how entrenched both sides are in the negotiation position. And yet we have been surprised. I mean, a good friend and mentor of mine, Terry Waite, who was held for 5 years in Beirut by Hezbollah, he his family were told a year into his captivity that categorically he is dead, and yet just a few years later he came out alive and well. So it's, these situations are never easy, they're never straightforward. But I think with as many sort of positive brains around the table as I know we have now, we should always remain hopeful that there can and there, I hope, will be further releases of hostages in the days and weeks ahead.
Rachel Briggs, thank you so much for talking to us on The World. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.